Now, I'm going to take this a step further and be a little bit more controversial.
When I first started squatting, I mean, I had a lot of those issues for a few years where I would have valgus knee when I would start squatting too heavy. My lack of mobility didn't allow me to squat to depth and maintain activity. So I would dive bomb because I lacked the ability to maintain force while like going down into depth of a squat. But as I started working on my mobility, as I started learning how to utilize my feet to grab the ground to create torsion, because like you just mentioned, when a lot of people squat and deadlift, for example, let's just say squat, their big toes will leave the ground when they start to reach depth because their toes are not creating that force to maintain that position. Their feet are weak, right?
Absolutely.
So then they end up losing that position and things end up getting out of place. But when you actually learn how to do that, you can maintain, and you also increase your mobility, your active mobility through those ranges. You don't just lose tension when you pass the 90-degree angle.
You don't have to give it up because you can demonstrate it. You can do it.
You can demonstrate it. But this is the thing though. Like, I don't think a lot of people generally take the time to build the ability to do that well. Because when you look at high level athletes that are also lifters that have worked on their feet, that have worked on their mobility, and they can get to those ranges and maintain activity. Their lumbar doesn't move at all. They're maintaining good spinal neutrality, all of that. We've all heard that to get optimal sleep, you should cool your room down to 68 to 69 degrees. But that's not all you need to do. And that's why we've partnered with 8 Sleep mattresses. Now they have the Pod Pro and the Pod Pro Cover. And the amazing technology of this mattress allows you to cool the mattress down to 55 degrees or to have it as warm as 110 degrees. But the great thing is that the temperature changes through the night based off your actual body temperature to make sure that you get the most restful sleep possible. You fall asleep 32% faster and you move around 40% less when you're actually asleep. It's amazing. And Andrew, how can people get it?
Yeah, this is amazing technology that actually changes its temperature based off of your sleep cycle. There's no other technology like it anywhere else. To take advantage of this, head over to 8sleep.com/power project. That's EIGHT sleep.com/power project. And you guys will receive $150 off this amazing technology. Links to them down in the description below. Let's get back to this video.
It takes a while to build, but I don't understand how that can't be beneficial. What I do think is that because it takes so long to build and because there are so many small little weaknesses, athletes can't necessarily have the time to focus on all of those different things.
Might take half a decade.
Might take a fucking while, right? And because of that, like, number one, I love the way that you're having people squat and athletes squat because, number one, they have to be good for their sport. Right? They have to be able to demonstrate the things on the field. They don't need to have to squat below 90 degrees or the 90-degree joint angle, right? But they can actually do that while maintaining that position, coming down here, up, still able to load that volume, maintain spinal position so they're not injuring anything. But I like, for example, we had Ben Patrick on, right? Knees over toes guy. You look at the ATG split squat. When I started doing the ATG split squat, I could not go into deep knee flexion without my ankle coming off the ground, and I couldn't maintain my an upright torso because I didn't have the hip mobility demands. But after a few months, I could maintain force, having my knee go all the way forward, keeping my heel on the ground, being active in that deep position with an upright torso, right? Because I was able to build those mobility demands and force in those positions. But it takes a while. So my question, I'm curious about this. Do you think that it's not beneficial for athletes to do it, or is it more so that it just takes too long and there's too many little things for these athletes to have to fix that the cost is not worth the benefit gained, especially since not all of this is going to be sport specific?
That's an interesting question. I would say, first off, what you said in terms of, okay, it's just the cost benefit analysis here in terms of how much time it's going to take. That's something we always have to take into consideration with high level athletes. At most I'll train athletes 4 hours a week. Okay. Four times a week for 1 hour.
Yeah.
That's not that much time. Okay. So we do have to basically say, hey, what is going to give us the most bang for our buck here? And it's kind of like even the topic of Olympic weightlifting for athletes. If they can't do Olympic weightlifts with or snatches and cleans and jerks with really good technique, or safe technique.
Yeah.
Is it worth having them do those exercises? And then you can say, well, we just need to coach them properly and train them. Well, Olympic weightlifters have been training Olympic lifts for years, decades, oftentimes, and they're still working on their form. They're still working on mastering, and they still have technical flaws. So I think to your point, there is definitely something to be said about, okay, how much time do we really have to work on these subtle elements? Now, I'm going to take this a step further and be a little bit more controversial and say that even if it didn't take that degree of time, I probably still wouldn't implement it, because if we're actually looking at some of the physiological and biomechanical principles, and even the neuromuscular physiology in terms of human movement, I would argue for most individuals, okay, some of those things would not necessarily be beneficial. Now, with that said, this is a tricky topic, but I always like to look at things on a scale of 1 to 10. It's just a very simple way to look at it, right? So if someone has very lousy movement, okay, and let's just say on a scale of 1 to 10, they're 2 or 3, horrible mobility, horrible stability, just everything, every dysfunction, compensation pattern you can imagine, okay? And we have them do some of the things that, maybe you're talking about, or certain mobility drills that maybe I wouldn't necessarily agree with or have athletes do. But let's just say on that scale of 1 to 10, just keeping it simple, that's a 7. Okay, maybe it's not optimal, but it's still good. That's going to represent a massive improvement for that athlete. And we do see scenarios like that. That's why athletes will do some of these protocols that I necessarily wouldn't say are optimal, maybe some of these corrective mobility routines. And they say, wow, this helped a lot. Okay. But we always have to look at, I always like to say good is the enemy of best. Just because something worked well doesn't mean it was optimal. And so if we're looking at some of the other principles that I like to follow in terms of like the 90-degree mechanics, taking muscles through a natural range of motion and not going through their maximal end range of motion, I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, just from maybe being a little biased and from what I've seen, I would put that more at like a 9. Okay. As far as a 10 goes, I don't know if nobody knows everything except God. So to say a certain training principle is a 10, would never want to claim that. So, but just being a little bit biased towards my own philosophies and what I've seen experientially and anecdotally, as well as some of the research supporting that. So again, you could see if I took someone who I trained, who they've been training at that 9 level for 2 years, and then we had them do other things that, let's just say, were on a 7. That would represent a regression that they might feel a little worse because their body's used to feeling a certain way. Now, I know that's a very overly simplistic way to put it, but because physiology is so complex, there's so many variables to take into consideration. I like to kind of use that scale of 1 to 10 just to show like, hey, there's a lot of things that work. I've tried so many things myself. I've used a lot of things, my own athletes over the years. And what I've come to in terms of my own training methods is not a result of going from, oh, I was training this way, now let me train 9 degrees because I want to come up with some, trendy new fad that I just think is going to sell and make me a marketing machine. It has nothing to do with that. It was a very gradual transition. It was a very long, steady journey where I kind of gradually saw myself having to adjust my range of motion, same with my athletes, until the point it's like, man, why is everything looking like these 90-degree angles when we, just have them clean things up, and why is everybody gravitating towards that? So I know it's kind of a long answer to a little bit of a simple question, but
I think you're bringing up a good point, especially the fact that you're working with athletes. You're working with people that this is their career, this is their job.
Yeah.
And that could be kind of looked at in different ways, because you could say, look, man, if anyone gets a hold of someone like John Jones, Bones Jones from the UFC, they can probably make him look pretty good, whether they have him doing farmers carries or bodybuilding or powerlifting, just because he is an exceptional athlete, So sometimes it can be difficult to tell, but I would imagine that athletes aren't really that into going backwards. They're not into having regression. They're not into being injured. They're not into, so if they're not making progress, I'm sure they're probably like, I don't know about this guy. And so clearly you must be getting results for people. What are some of the results that you're seeing, and how long have you been working with athletes?
Yeah, it's one of the things on social media and Instagram. People always say, "Oh, how much are you paying these athletes to work with you?"
That's a good question. How much are you paying?
Oh man, I'm almost bankrupt now.
Yeah, sure.
No, but so it's one of those things. Athletes are very stubborn. They're very skeptical, and they're a hard sell. Okay, so and they're especially if things that are different, especially when you start telling them that, hey, what you've been doing is not optimal, and in some ways, what you've been doing is wrong. Even though you're a pro athlete, let me have you do it differently. For them to stick with it, they have to see results almost immediately. And what I mean by immediately, obviously, they're not going to get stronger. They're not going to gain muscle within a day, but they have to feel certain sensations. And I can almost, I tell, different people this who ask me about my training methods all the time. If I can get an athlete in for one session, I know I'm going to have them hooked. And it's nothing to do with my amazing training abilities, my amazing skills. It has nothing to do with it. I just know that if we put an athlete through a protocol, they can feel certain stimuli that are optimal for the human body. They're like, wow, that feels amazing. I can feel things fire that I have not felt fire. I can do these positions that used to cause me pain within 5 minutes. It's like, how come I can squat now? And I haven't been able to squat for 5 years. There's no pain. All we did was, take them through a simple protocol that is based on scientific sound principles. Again, it has nothing to do with my training. I could have a lot of my clients take some of these pro athletes through the same thing. They would get the exact same results because they've had to do it themselves. So when the athlete feels that, it's an easy sell. And then over time, they start, wow, I'm stronger than I've been. My movement on the field feels great. And that usually, they start feeling that usually in a few weeks. So again, this has nothing to do with me like giving myself a pat on the back. It's just really cool to see when some of these athletes, have a proper stimulus and they use it and they take hold of it, what it does. But I will say this too, you'd be surprised how many of these pro athletes, their training protocols in the NFL and in MLB, they're pretty lousy. Okay. So, you could actually take a lot of other protocols and they would probably work well too, because the training that they've been doing is so antiquated and so outdated because it's what coaches have been using, for the last few decades, because their coaches were doing it, because their coaches before them were doing it. And it just got handed down. And really in football, especially, you just see this grandfather kind of hierarchy of people who have been in the league for decades, and they happen to know this person, and it's tough to break in. So a lot of the methods are very old school.
Have you studied things like force production, or have you kind of more just had more like observational? Because if you think about like someone doing like a long jump, somebody doing a triple jump, somebody doing a high jump, somebody dunking a basketball, where there's a great deal of force production must be going on for somebody to elevate their body in these ways and to propel their body in these particular movements, but they are not bending their knee very far. Is this sort of how you stumbled upon some of this stuff, or is this more like you're in the gym and you can squat 225 by rubbing your butt on the ground, and versus you can handle 405 by going mid range, which some people would say mid range, or like a half squat type of movement? Like, how did you kind of start to really stumble upon some of this stuff? And what was, if there was like an aha moment, was there a moment where you're like, I think this makes sense this way?
Yeah. The aha moment for me was, it was necessity, because I got to the point when I was about 24, that I couldn't squat more than once every 3 weeks. I couldn't deadlift more than once every few weeks. My joints, my knees, my hips, everything was hurting. And everyone who saw my squat, and I'm dead serious about this, everyone who saw my squat in the gym, I'm talking about like experienced powerlifters, weightlifters, always said to me, man, you have an amazing squat. Awesome ass grass squat, great mobility, such a good looking squat. How do you get it to, look that way? And I had that since pretty much, I would say, from 21 to 24. So it's not that I wasn't doing a proper squat. By the books and by, kind of expert common consensus, it was a great squat. Okay. It baffled me. Why was my body not able to do it anymore? Now, I have a pretty sensitive body for whatever reason. I actually feel it was a blessing in disguise. Some people would say, that sucks, but I think it was a blessing because it forced me to reanalyze things a lot earlier. Okay. A lot of individuals, maybe, they can squat deep until they're 40, 35, maybe 50, maybe 60. I see it sometimes in high school athletes, 17, 18, they have to change because it just catches up to them. I always say, faulty activation patterns, faulty movement eventually catches up to everyone, like smoking.
Mm-hmm.
You may be able to smoke for a few months and you start to feel it. Some people can smoke for decades, not feel the consequences, but eventually it's felt in everyone who smokes to some degree. And the extent of what's felt, whether it's death, some people, they die sooner because they smoke. Some people, their quality of life changes for decades and it sucks because they can't breathe as well. It just messes with their hormones, their chemical makeup. So it does impact everyone. For me, it impacted me when I was 24. I pain pretty much every area of my body. So it really made me rethink what was going on. And I said, okay, if I'm following the books and I'm doing it that way, why is my body starting to break down? So I basically had to go on this journey of fixing myself. It led me down this path of wanting to seek even higher education, researching for myself. So I did my PhD. And this was not something where it's like you said, I would say it was the opposite of, okay, I was doing 225 deep and it's like, oh, let me try 405, see how it feels. It was a very gradual process because I was almost arrogant about squat depth. I was like, oh, if you can't squat deep, it doesn't count. I was one of those guys. So it wasn't like you would not have caught me squatting shallow in my earlier mid-20s or early 20s because of, almost I didn't want to disappoint the bros. Let's put it that way.
Depth before dishonor, as they say.
Exactly. So it just took me down a journey. So I started looking. I basically said, hey, I need to basically disregard everything that I've learned, start with a blank slate. Let me look at the research and the science by myself without, from my own lens, not with other people telling me how to interpret the results or what we should be doing. Let me look at it for myself. And I gradually kind of came up with these protocols, did a lot of little mini research studies, and then did my dissertation at UGA. And the more I looked at things, the more I looked at biomechanics, the more I looked at neurophysiology, structural physiology, the more I started applying some of these protocols to my clients, because I've been training, personal training since I was 18, and I have not stopped, that's been another part of my journey, because it's allowed me to take what I've learned and implement it immediately, not just to my own body, to make sure, oh, this isn't just a personal thing. For Joel, this stuff works, but for everyone else, everyone's different. No. I've been training people of all different walks of life, different ages, different sex, different ethnicities since I've been 18. So I've been able to apply these things, and I started to see things come together. It was becoming very congruent and very systematic and very similar, almost uncannily so. And so it made me really start to think, what's going on here? And that's how these protocols came into existence.